to the virtual Pathfinder channel. In this video we're going to take a look at how the typical smartphone camera compares to a mirrorless camera. If you're interested in photography, lenses and camera equipment, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I'm interested to hear your opinion about smartphone cameras. Please write what you think about it in the comment section below. The reason I look into this comparison between interchangeable lens cameras and smartphone cameras is the enormous impact the mobile device cameras have had the recent 10 years. The sales volume of system cameras has fallen about 90% since 2010 and possibly further in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. One should keep in mind that the interchangeable lens camera market has been challenged before, first by the compact point-and-shoot cameras in the late 1970s. The next transformation was going from film to digital cameras in the late 1990s and early 2000s. That development was mostly a technology shift within the camera industry. The evolution of smartphones the recent 10 years is a different situation, since it's coming from the outside, not from the camera industry itself. The effect has been enormous from about year 2010. In this video I will look into the main reasons for this development. As an experiment I will compare photos of scenes shot with two kinds of cameras, an Apple iSight 8-megapixel camera and a mirrorless micro four thirds camera with a 14mm lens. That corresponds to a 28mm full-frame lens. First, let's have a look at some sample images shot with a mobile device camera. First, we will have a look at the specifications of the mobile device camera and the mirrorless camera in this comparison. Then I will talk a bit about the reason the mobile device camera has become so competitive, which is the use of the Back-Illuminated sensor, the so-called BSI CMOS image sensors. These sensors are gradually becoming more common on the camera market as well, but their initial use has been for smaller devices. After that we will move on to a comparison of images shot with the two cameras. Finally, I will give my conclusions from this comparison, and I will look at the future development on the market. Let's have a look at the specifications for the camera and the mobile device camera in this comparison. As mentioned, the comparison is between a micro four thirds mirrorless camera with a wide-angle lens and an Apple iSight camera. The information is gathered from the internet, not all from Apple, so there's a small possibility for error. But the idea is just to give a comparison of these kind of cameras. The first difference is of course the image sensor, where the mobile device uses a Back-Illuminated CMOS sensor. The mobile device sensor diameter is about 20% of the diameter of the mirrorless camera sensor. The mobile device has half the number of pixels in each image. The mirrorless camera has 16 megapixels and the mobile device camera has 8 megapixels. The mobile device pixel pitch is about 1/3 of that of the mirrorless camera. Both cameras have autofocus. The close focus distance for the mobile camera is about 50 millimeters, which allows macro photography. The mirrorless camera wide-angle lens cannot be used for macro photography. The full-frame equivalent focal length is about equal for the two lenses, which is about 30 millimeters. The maximum aperture is f2.5 for both cameras. The mirrorless camera has image stabilization, while the mobile device camera does not. This is not a deal breaker for a wide-angle camera. Optical image stabilization is more important for longer focal lengths. I read somewhere that the smartphone camera has 5 lens elements, which is a bit amazing considering how slim it is. If I remember correctly, the fastest shutter speed is about 1/30th of a second. That makes it a bit hard to capture fast-moving objects. The first digital video cameras and still image cameras used CCD image sensors, which is charge-coupled device sensors. Those ones were expensive and didn't have that high resolution. The CCD sensors also had high power consumption, which later led to their replacement with CMOS image sensors used in most cameras today. CMOS image sensors are less expensive to produce and have lower power consumption, which is especially useful for mobile devices such as tablets and smartphones. The breakthrough for smartphones was around 2008 with the introduction of Apple's first iPhone. Looking back, that is just 12 years ago, but a lot has happened since then, everyone can tell. The digital cameras have become better, but more striking is the development of the mobile device cameras. The social media revolution is built on posting both text and images easily, which means that the mobile device cameras and their use is evolving in symbiosis with the social media platforms. Initially, it was accepted the image didn't have that high resolution or a high image quality. For two reasons. It was just a snapshot of documentation of a moment, and it was viewed on a tiny screen, which in many cases didn't have that good resolution. As the displays got better, higher image quality became a requirement for the smartphone companies who wanted to stay in the competition. The mobile devices needed cameras with higher resolution, with compact format and low energy consumption. At that time, the camera market was in a sense going in a different direction, trying to solve the problem with heavy weight and big size of full-frame lenses and camera bodies. Many companies reduced camera equipment size by introducing mirrorless cameras. Those cameras use smaller image area on the sensors, so-called crop sensor cameras. There are lots of different standards and crop factors, such as Micro Four Thirds founded by Olympus and Panasonic. There is APS-C for Canon, Nikon, Fujifilm, etc. The evolution of these compact versions of system cameras led to images with less pixels than the full-frame cameras, which in a way went in the opposite direction compared to the mobile devices. What happened is that the cameras and lenses became more compact and lightweight, with a certain loss of pixel resolution. The Micro Four Thirds standard has a crop factor too, and images had about 16 megapixels using the typical CMOS sensor. Although recently, most new cameras have moved a step up to 20 megapixels. So while cameras took the step down from full frame format to between 16 and 25 megapixels, the mobile devices moved up from just under 1 megapixel up to 8 to 12 megapixel cameras. So the gap between the two kinds of cameras got a lot smaller when it comes to image resolution. Although the cameras moved closer to the smartphones in size, the smartphones were still pocket size and also a multi-purpose online device with mini computer functionality for all kinds of tasks. More or less everyone has a smartphone in their pocket at all times, while even most of the camera enthusiasts don't carry around the interchangeable lens camera 24/7. Not to mention that the smartphones usually also have post-processing capabilities and a seamless online connection to all the social media platforms. All these things taken together is the explanation why the camera market has lost such a huge part to the smartphones. But mainly the higher resolution of the images led to this development. So how did the smartphones manage to increase the pixel resolution to be able to compete with the traditional cameras? The reason the mobile device cameras have become so competitive is the backside illuminated CMOS sensors, which allow higher pixel density and high optical efficiency. It has 50% higher light gathering capability, which corresponds to half exposure value or a half aperture stop. The stronger signal requires less amplification, which leads to lower noise level. The smaller pixel pitch also makes the sensors more compact, while still offering high resolution in terms of pixels. There are a few negative issues with the backside illuminated CMOS, such as the more complex production process, which makes it more expensive. The process has more steps than the ordinary CMOS sensor production. The first part of the process is the same as for the CMOS sensors, which is to add the photosensitive layer onto the silicon wafer and then build the wiring layers on top of that. The second step for CMOS is then to continue by adding a Bayer filter or a color filter on top, and on top of that a micro lens layer. But the backside illuminated CMOS needs to be flipped so that the bottom side comes up. Then that part has to be grinded down so that the photosensitive area gets exposed. After that, the Bayer filter can be added on top. And finally, on top of that, the micro lens layer can be added. That means that there will be no wiring layers obstructing the light coming into the photosensitive area, which increases the light gathering capability. One consequence of this is that the sensor becomes thinner and more fragile, especially if the sensor size increases. So for smaller sensors, this has not been a big problem, which makes them easy to use for mobile devices, since these have slightly less pixels than interchangeable lens cameras. That is the reason this kind of sensor was introduced in mobile devices first. However, the manufacturing methods are being improved, and now there are some full-frame cameras using BSI CMOS. Apart from being fragile, there are other problems with the backside illuminated CMOS, for instance higher level of dark current, dark noise, there's some crosstalk and color leaking from adjacent pixels. All these problems are being continuously improved, and we can expect these sensors to become better, at least to the level where the ordinary CMOS are today. This is a continuous evolution. As mentioned, there are already full-frame cameras available using these sensors. Here's a short timeline for the BSI CMOS sensors. In 2007, OmniVision Technologies introduced the first BSI sensor. It was expensive and therefore did not get very widespread. It was more for specialized applications which required low noise and good low light capabilities, such as astrophotography. In 2009, Sony released the Exmor-R consumer-oriented BSI sensor, which had a relatively lower price, which made them useful in mobile devices such as smartphones and cameras. That was the first step for mobile devices to reduce the gap in image quality compared to interchangeable lens cameras. In 2012, Sony Exmor-RS was released, which has a stacked BSI CMOS. The stacked sensors include extra layer for processing, which speeds up the frame capture and allows faster bursts and higher video frame rates. In 2015, Sony released a full-frame BSI sensor camera, the Alpha 7R2. In 2017, Nikon D850 was released, which is a full-frame 45.7 megapixel camera with BSI sensor. In 2018, Fujifilm released the X-T3 mirrorless APS-C camera with a 26.1 megapixel BSI sensor. Here are some pairs of images showing the result when using a mirrorless camera and a mobile device camera. The image from the mirrorless camera is to the left and the image from the mobile device camera is to the right. I will not comment on all of them. You can stop the video and have a closer look at each and judge for yourself. I will only comment the first image because it shows the importance of shutter speed control. This is a fountain with water flowing and falling down from the top to the bottom. And for the mirrorless camera image, the drops can be frozen like crystals because of the fast shutter speed. To the right, the water falls and gets blurred out by the motion, since there is no control on this mobile device of shutter speed. If you look at the static part of the image, you can see that the mobile device camera is surprisingly sharp. There may be a difference in focal point. I think the mobile device camera is focused on the structure behind the water, whereas the mirrorless camera is focused on the actual water. In any case, it is surprising how sharp the mobile device image is. Photos from the mobile device camera in this comparison are surprisingly good when compared to the mirrorless camera with wide-angle lens. It is in many situations hard to tell which is better when looking at the typical image size, that is, when not pixel peeping. When looking at a 27-inch computer screen, there is an obvious difference because the mirrorless camera photos has twice as many pixels as the mobile device camera. Most people make at least a minor touch-up in the post-processing app, so differences in color rendering may be corrected. For macro photography, the mobile device camera actually gets a lot closer to objects, about 50 millimeters, while the close focus for the mirrorless camera lens is about 180 millimeters. But on the other hand, those images can be cropped and magnified since those have twice as many pixels. It is important to point out that the smartphone cameras usually don't offer much control over the image. For instance, choice of very fast or slow shutter speeds. Control of the image depth of field by changing aperture is not possible. For a mirrorless camera with a wide-angle lens, the blurring out of background is limited for a lens with largest aperture f2.5, so that may actually not make a big difference. A photographer who wants shallow depth of field need to invest in a lens with better specifications, which probably will be reflected in the price tag. In low light, the smartphone cameras tend to produce a bit grainy photos. That is probably due to the limitations in shutter speed, since the sensors actually are more efficient than the ordinary CMOS sensor. For newer mobile devices, there is a burst mode for low light situations, where several images are stacked to reduce image noise. Still, the camera offers more flexibility in these situations. If you are into any specialized photography like astrophotography, the camera is necessary, since full control over exposure time may be necessary. The choice is not really between the smartphone or the mirrorless camera, since most people already have the smartphone for other reasons than photography. It is more a question whether or not you need to buy a wide-angle lens for your camera. Most people who own a camera doesn't use the camera exclusively with a wide-angle lens. In my opinion, you should either buy a high-specification wide-angle lens or just use the smartphone camera. If you go for the latter, you can save money for buying a good portrait lens or other telephoto lens instead. Most people have limited budget, and it gives more value for money to put priority on getting something you don't already have. The low and mid segment for wide-angle lenses are not adding much value compared to what today's smartphones can do. So my advice is either to spend money on a high-end wide-angle lens or save the money for lenses with other focal lengths, not wide-angle lens. When it comes to the future for interchangeable lens cameras, I think we can assume that the Back-Illuminated CMOS will become mainstream for cameras soon. That will probably lead to higher pixel resolution as well as lower sensor noise for both crop sensor and full-frame cameras. The first steps are already taken in that direction, which I mentioned earlier in the image sensor timeline. I look forward to do low-light photography with less noise and also to have a bit more pixels than I have today in my Micro Four Thirds camera. I hope you found the information in this video useful. Soon I will release more videos about photography equipment. Please subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any information. Have a nice week.